Welcome to the Building Interest podcast presented by Leader Bank. In season 2 of our podcast, we've been exploring what it means to be a leader through conversations with leaders from within the communities we serve, as well as from across the world of banking and technology. Each conversation has focused on our guest's personal leadership journey and provided insights on what it means to be a good leader. In our last episode, we were joined by Nathan Baumeister, CEO and co-founder of Z Suite Technologies, and we talked about his leadership journey, entrepreneurial successes, and the importance of living your brand. Today, we're joined by Jess Mader, Human Resources Operations Manager at Leader Bank, and we're going to talk about his experience, learnings as a leader, the importance of corporate transparency, and how building trust within a corporate culture has evolved over the years. So before we talk about corporate transparency, and we're going to talk a little bit about how that translates into your role, why that's part of human resources, team member engagement, things like that, let's learn a little bit about who you are, Jess. I guess tell us what your responsibilities are. And a human resources operations manager, in my mind at least, could mean many different things. And is that always a direction you wanted to go?
Well, my current role, I oversee the benefits, compensation, employee relations, pieces of human resources, as well as our payroll functions. So we basically touch everything. We work closely with recruitment, or we do the onboarding, and in terms of HR has been the direction I wanted to go coming out of college. So it's something I enjoy. There's multiple facets to it. Several years ago, we're talking probably 20 plus years ago, HR evolved to less of kind of a service center model and more of a strategic partner to leadership. So
can you describe what you mean by that?
Well, in the past, people thought of HR as somewhere they go to, get a paycheck or fill out paperwork, right? HR paperwork were synonymous. HR wasn't so much involved in sort of the strategic planning of an organization, the growth plans of an organization, whereas now HR is more focused on driving engagement, being a partner to leadership, because honestly, a company is only as good as its employees. And in our case, we refer to them as team members. So really...
When you say that you coming out of, I forget if you said out of high school or out of college, that you wanted to get into the human resources space, did you already see sort of this vision of human resources being more than just the place you go to fill out a form?
Yes. I learned more about HR because I started out of college in the staffing industry. So I was managing staffing firms. And when you're in the staffing industry, you're communicating with human resources professionals. You're meeting with them because those are the people that you're establishing the relationships with, and those are the people you're working with your candidates to get in place. So I got a great insight into human resources. I have a background I have a legal background, so there's a lot of legal work. There's a lot of compliance that goes into HR. So it's something that interested me. And it was a tough transition because people in HR departments didn't necessarily want to hire someone that just had staffing experience. So it was, I started off my career in HR as a contractor for a short time with a healthcare organization. And after a few weeks or so, I was hired permanently as a recruiter. So from there, very quickly, I got into sort of the legal workings of human resources and employee productivity, dealing with driving engagement, overseeing recruitment strategy, building an education function for leaders. So it evolved there. And then I was lucky enough at that particular organization to get experience in all aspects of human resources, which was very helpful in terms of my professional development, really helpful as a leader too, because I'm a big believer in developing your team. So with those skill sets, I can help build on my team members' skill sets.
Now, the teams that you develop obviously would have to be somewhat different in different industries. You mentioned healthcare. There are some similarities between healthcare and banking, both very highly regulated industries. There's a sense of urgency to certain things. I mean, obviously, health urgency is very different from financial urgency. Yeah. But if you are waiting for a multi-$100,000 transaction to close that everything is contingent upon, you might be just as stressed as the person who's going in for a non-life-threatening surgery the next day. So there's some analogy there. But you mentioned being able to really develop those teams. Now, how much does the HR role factor into making sure that those are the right people in the right place at the right company? Like,
Well,
is that analogous in healthcare? Are you more or less connected to the team member base in healthcare or in banking, or is the role functionally similar?
functionally, it's similar. And I've always come from a space of, in terms of hiring and when I oversaw recruitment, I'm a big believer in hiring for capacity and for passion as opposed to necessarily always someone's skill set or resume. I've always believed, matter of fact, one of my best, most talented HR people was a school teacher, and wanted to get into HR. So for me, HR, experience is important, but hiring the right people is important. And by the right people, I mean people that are going to buy in and help drive the culture, people that are positive, people that are growth minded, and people that are focusing on customer service excellence. And, to me, at the end of the day, and the reason why this bank is so successful is customer service. So, again, recruiting people that are passionate about their work and want to grow, as opposed to necessarily someone who maybe isn't in that vein but has a ton of experience. But I find it sometimes harder to, maybe grow and develop those people. So, I guess at the end of the day, I've always had a strong connection to the workforce in general. As an HR person, I found the way to be successful, especially in healthcare, where there's less remote work, is to be visible. For me, I could sit there and I could be remote 4 days a week, I guess, if I wanted to, but I enjoy coming into the office. There's a different energy. And as an HR professional, you should strive to be visible so people get to know you. And then, if there's ever a time where they need to connect with you, there's not any kind of apprehension, because HR being HR, people sometimes, gets a bad rap of like, oh, I'm going to the principal's office kind of thing, right?
But you got to
So
bring the same energy that you expect from other people.
yes, yeah. So just being out and about, walking around, talking to people, popping in people's offices. I'd much rather meet in person if we can, if people are here. So, that's definitely a key component of being successful in HR.
So I want to talk about transparency a little bit, and to some extent, hiring and of course firing as well is really not a very transparent process. There's a lot of secrecy involved. There's, rounds of interviews. No one knows who else is interviewing. You don't know what you're going to pay someone and things. So there is some inherent secrecy in that. But the transparency that I want to talk about is about the company and the selection process that happens in the company, right? So I was listening to another podcast the other day, and incidentally, it had nothing to do with dieting. So I'm going to bring up
Yeah.
dieting in our podcast.
Yeah.
And the idea was, if you want to lose weight and you've discovered that your problem is you eat too many sweets, but you can't just eliminate sweets entirely, because you're not going to get away from doing something that you inherently want to do.
Mhm.
But you can reduce the sweets and you can have a conversation with yourself. Think about, when is the right time? Do I really want to do this now? Is this the right time that I want to allocate a smaller portion of sweets in hopes of cutting down your overall? And the conclusion of that commentary in that podcast was that made the quality of the sweets actually go up, because the person was no longer just eating everything that was put in front of them, but they had made a conscious decision of, no, I'm not going to waste my calories on this sweet that's sort of moderate and not very good. I'm going to wait until I have something really good in front of me, and that's what I want to waste my calories on, and that's what I want to enjoy. And I listened to that and I thought, in a couple of days, I'm going to be talking to Jess. Now, people are not sweets, but are we going down that sort of same road where we're thinking, okay, let's just not hire everyone that comes along? And from a prospective employee's perspective, are we not just applying to every company that comes along, but are we sitting back and thinking, is this the right place? And then if that is the right place, does that inherently make the quality of the company and the hire go up?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Um, the thing, the way I think about it now too is in this kind of market, it's very It's very unusual, and we've never seen it before. COVID is partially to blame. So what has happened is, the whole COVID epidemic caused a lot of people to retire or to go into different career fields. Healthcare was, and it was irreparably affected negatively during the whole COVID process. So, and nowadays where, other companies are hurting to hire, Target's paying higher, retail is paying a lot higher. There's a lot more competition. So the recruitment process is very much, I would say, more proactive now. You can't just wait for people to come to your website and come to you. You got to go out and find the people, whether it be off of LinkedIn or off of professional connections or personal connections. And then at the end of the day, it's got to be a fit for everyone. So, in the interview process, having been through it a number of times, being the interviewer, you can tell if you read into people, you can kind of gauge their level of enthusiasm for the company and for the position. And I always want to ask them about, like the typical, which most people do. I want to ask them about the company, what interests them. And I know pretty quickly if they've done their homework and if they're interested in the company. Like, I want people to run to us, not run away from something else. So I think recruitment right now is the most difficult time in recruitment right now, because it's a candidate short market. There's a lot of instability. People are not moving as frequently as they used to. And the other thing is, banking, the industry that we're in, has had a pretty rough couple of year stretch here. The news is out there about banks going under. So it makes recruitment that much more difficult.
So you mentioned, and I love this little snippet of, you want people to run to us, not away from something else. That is the most succinct way I've ever heard that said, and it really resonates to me.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's what we want, then how do we, and this goes back to transparency,
Mm-hmm.
how do we put us out there in the light as an entity that people want to run to against all those odds that you just said?
Mm-hmm.
Banking can have a negative connotation, especially with some of the news recently, and we all live in banking every day and we don't think it's negative. So obviously there is a way to present it in that more favorable light, so we get people running to us rather than away from something else. Well, what does that look like? How do we make sure that the right people come running to us, as opposed to the people maybe that are in fact running away from something else aren't the only ones knocking on our door?
Well, so one of the things that I would go back to, well, first of all, we start from a position of strength, right? We're a Globe top 100 employer. That's a huge honor, and that's not an easy thing to achieve. So, right, seeing something like that when I was going through the interview process, that's impressive. So we do start from a position of strength. But the other thing that I remember, that thing that I feel strongly about, and then you realize quickly when you're at this bank here, is it's not a typical bank. This bank is very innovative, very fluid. I mean, in my time here, we've already opened up an insurance division. So where other banks are more the typical banking model, this is not. We have the loan officers, we do mortgages, we do a lot more here than a typical bank does. And the thing that I appreciate here is, it seems to me that leadership is always taking a look at the business and how we can adapt and grow. There's always that growth mindset. So so going back to being a top employer, and I mean, people inside of your organization, like I said, we start from a position of strength, are happy and engaged. The leaders here are amazing. You can tell on the conference calls, in the meetings, people are engaged. You need to carry that enthusiasm over to the interview process. You're selling your company, so you're essentially selling something. And if you can present it in a way that this isn't a typical bank, and this is why we're the best in the industry, and this is these figures, this is why we're one of the top lenders in the state, is because we're innovative, we're growing, we're not suffering like some banks with older models. So I think that's important. But in terms of the other part of this is getting out there. So I think we do a good job of getting our name out there. It's
So
very
some of that
clear.
advertisement is not just for the banking customer, it's also for the prospective team member
Yes.
customer.
Yes.
So if we demonstrate our passion and our leadership proactively, we're not waiting for people to find us. We're saying we are
We're going to
actively
get
looking
them.
for the right people.
Yep. So, and the other part of it is what they do well is, they're recruiting people in jobs who are not looking to leave, right? That's what they call passive recruitment. So you're not recruiting active people who are out there. You're recruiting people that are in their jobs, and doing some of the work that we think is valuable that we need. So you're always going to get the better people that you're going out in your hands selecting. I think your chances of hiring the stronger candidates are a lot greater when you're doing passive recruitment.
So let's switch for a second to your own personal brand of leadership. And I understand at one point you were a certified leadership coach. So multi-part question. First question is, what does that actually mean? What does that look like? But second question is that still either a certification or just even a skill set that you actively leverage when we have new team members come on board to make sure that they are on the right track?
So essentially what it is it's a skill. It's an education. It's a learning program I went through that helps you especially focus on managers that are struggling in one or more areas. So when I first got the certification, I worked for a large employer, thousands of employees. In healthcare, sometimes, like in other industries, it's not always the transition to management is sometimes just you're the best you're the best nurse, so now you're the nurse manager. So people don't come into those jobs with a lot of training, so they almost at some point they could be set up for failure. So I would work with managers on engaging their employees, having productive conversations. So there's a lot of coaching, a lot of one-on-one, and really everything's aimed at building an engaged workforce, because anything will tell you an engaged workforce is about 20 or 30% more productive than a disengaged workforce.
It makes a lot of sense what you say, and you use the example of the best nurse, and then that person may not be the best manager because they have no background in managing. Yeah. You've also just taken your best nurse off the rounds. Yeah. If you make that person a manager. So now you almost have two voids to fill. You have to train the person to be a manager, and you also have to make sure that they can backfill their own position with the next best nurse.
Yes. Yeah. So you hit the nail on the head. So I didn't even think about it from that end. It just, for me, it was just, and I worked on larger programs because we took a look at how the managers, so we took a number of measures where we put in place formal programs when people transitioned into leadership roles. It went through a lot of inside and outside education, a lot of mentoring, a lot of one-on-one. So we didn't just drop them into position. So, and that when we did that, we saw our engagement levels go up. So I thought that was, an effective strategy here, because like I said, it's pretty frequent that people are promoted into management that have never been in management. So
if you have someone who's promoted in, maybe not everyone is cut out for it. You ever have any, for lack of a better word, failures that came about in that way? And then what lessons can we take from that, where maybe that wasn't the right person to promote, and how could we have known? How could we, or maybe did they fail because they weren't properly supported? Just looking for some lessons on how do we make sure that if we've made this decision, that it's the right decision.
Yeah. So,
or is it always kind of a bit of a gamble?
No. But going back to your question about have I worked with leaders that have failed? Yeah, there's been a lot.
So what do you learn from that? Not them, but you. How do you take that experience forward and make you a better leadership coach, make you a better human resources manager?
Well, part of it's introspectively. So whenever I was involved in these coaching and training sessions, the first thing I always thought about if it wasn't working as it should was, what am I doing wrong? What can I be doing better? Because if they fail, I fail, right?
And that's the last thing most people want to admit, that they might be the one making the mistake. So I think that's a really valuable point that you bring up, is that start perhaps by looking at yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing that's critical for to be successful as a manager is you got to be open, you got to be approachable, and you got to be transparent. So, for
What makes a
me,
manager transparent?
for me, a manager is transparent um, if they share any information, if they share critical information about the organization on a larger level. But it's an opportunity for you to make your employees realize how their job impacts the bank. So,
Why is that important?
well, because you want your employees to feel like they have some skin in the game, right? You want people to be in jobs where they're not just, doing one or two things, but not knowing how that contributes to the bank. So you want to be able to, articulate to them how their contributions, make a positive impact on the bank, why their job matters. And that's part of transparency. But, I came out of a meeting very early on here, and it was our CFO speaking. It was one of the better meetings I've been to, because I had never been into banking. I had never worked in banking. And he laid out in about a half hour, basically the business model of the bank, how we are successful, where we're looking to grow. It was the best 30-minute education I think I've ever had. So from there, I've dealt with P&Ls and financial numbers before, but that's information that's critical for my team, right? Because you want to share with them where the potential concerns are, and you also want to share to them where the successes are. Because, like I said, this bank is very innovative. People tend to worry about job security when you hear all the negative publicity, but to be able to bring it back to the team, say, guys, we don't have to worry about that. We're a different business model. We're innovative. We have other business lines. So, there's times where, your interest rates are high. So maybe we're not growing in that area, but we're growing in the insurance area. So it's important to share that information that comes from a higher level. So people feel invested in their jobs.
So this meeting that you came out of, you obviously left that meeting feeling like you knew better what your role's value was to the organization, but then you turned around and carried that message forward to bestow that same level of understanding of what their value is to the people around you.
Yeah, and the other part of transparency, it's got to be two ways, right? So it's not just delivering a message, but it's two-way communication, right?
Right.
If I have employees that are concerned, or I see trends in the organization, I need to bring that to the top, especially in someone in HR, and I do. So, when I have concerns about, morale or issues in a certain area, I hear some feedback, I got to bring that to leadership, and they have to know it, and I do hear regularly, and our senior team is very supportive, and I'm action oriented, so I have the luxury of I've done this sort of employee relations piece of HR for a couple of decades now, so it's kind of one of my stronger points. But
is this something that can be measured? Like, do we have metrics that tell us whether or not these initiatives are working?
Well, I think you can look at the Boston Globe survey, and that'll tell you what's working and what's not. But really, the way you have to dig deeper is, as a manager, you have to have those daily conversations with your team. How are you doing? What can I do better? That's my big line. You can ask people that work for me is, what can I do better? When we
Culture
go,
managing, but not necessarily micromanaging, because that turns people off.
no, you have to give people autonomy in their jobs. People don't want
But
to
you
sit
want to
here.
keep a pulse on how they're feeling.
Yeah, it's a fine line, right? But at the end of the day, you need to make the work meaningful. So you need to diversify people's work. You need to let them know how their work contributes. You need to let them know their value. So, I mean, those are just some of the parts of transparency. And at the end of the day, I talk about engagement, right? So people are essentially satisfied in they know how they contribute to the company. they're enthusiastic about their work, and they put their best foot forward. So transparency is sort of the biggest driver of engagement.
So
I've been at place. Oh, go ahead, Greg.
I was going to say, with these terms that we kind of keep tossing around, we talk about passion, we talk about engagement, we talk
Mhm.
about transparency. Is there any one particular, maybe not even one of those three, things that really embodies who you are, that is your personal brand or your theme, that when you get up in the morning, that's what you're bringing to work? Or never mind work. Maybe it's something you bring to something outside of work. Maybe your personal brand and theme
Mhm.
is you bring it to other things too. You bring it to your personal time.
Yeah. So I am definitely enthusiastic, and highly engaged in the company. So I also like to think I have a good sense of humor to lighten the mood. I'm self-deprecating. I make fun of myself.
I like that word enthusiastic because that's not a corporate buzzword that we typically hear. We hear people, you ask someone what their best strength is at work or something, they'll talk about attention to detail, or they'll talk about timeliness, or they'll talk about, some managerial strength or something. But just this raw feeling of, hey, I'm enthusiastic. I love it.
So let me give you an example. So say I'm a teller at one of our branches. Um, if I have a manager that I don't necessarily trust, or I don't really know, um, and I don't take the time to know them, and I'm micromanaging them, and they don't know anything about what's going on with the company, um, and I got another employee who is happy, manager's good, manager's open, transparent. If I'm coming to work and my stomach's in knots because I have to deal with someone difficult, and it's kind of a thankless environment, as opposed to, I like this company, I like the job, who's going to be more productive? Who's going to provide better customer service skills? The person that's dreading to come to work that day and stomach in knots, or the person that wants to be here, likes to be here, is treated fairly, is valued, is rewarded, is recognized. That person,
Regardless of their technical skill set.
yes. So, and that's the big thing for me. You need to have people that are engaged. Companies that have engaged workforces are 4 times more productive than companies that do not. So, I mean, at the end of the day, that's the most important thing for any organization. We're building an engagement committee, and the reason why I like this is because we can come from a spot where we're not just driving down initiatives that we think we're gonna make people happy. I think our team members would like this, so let's have a company barbecue. I think the thing that makes the Let valuable is we have people from all different parts of the organization. They talk to their coworkers. They're telling us what they need. So it's coming from the employee, not the employer. In our case, it's coming from the team members, not necessarily all the time leadership. So we're getting our ideas, from
Organically from
yeah,
within.
exactly.
So I want to go back to you working at the teller line there for a second. And I know you're frustrated because you dread your manager and your stomach's in knots every morning when you come in. Um, what do you tell our listeners that might be in that situation? It doesn't have to be a teller. They could be in a job. They might feel stuck at a company or with a manager that they don't trust. And you said earlier, we don't want them running away from a company to try to be at the next right place. What do you tell that person? How do they navigate either within that company or maybe come find a better company to get into a better place? What do they need to do? Obviously, we could say, well, their manager should be better or their company should be better. But as an individual, what options do they have? What do you tell them?
Well, I think first and foremost, if you're in that situation, you really have to try to build a relationship with your manager and let him know where the pain points are. Let him or her know where your pain points are.
Even if
Um,
you're afraid they might not want to hear it from you.
Even if you're afraid, because otherwise, where are you going to go?
So number one, be
You,
strong, stand up for yourself.
yes, and there's ways to do it in a positive manner, and I've coached plenty of team members on how to do that, and in the past, plenty of employees on how to do that. You always start with the manager. If someone would come right to HR, you're sort of negatively impacting the trust in that relationship. So
You haven't given it a chance.
yes,
You've
so you
gone end
really have to.
around and you
Yep.
haven't given them a chance to let it develop.
And then you got to think introspectively too. Am I not happy because of my manager or the environment, or am I not happy because of me? You know
Oh,
what I
that's a
mean?
tough conversation to have, though.
Am I just not going to be happy in this environment? And in
Right.
that case, you probably need to look outside. But if you're in a situation maybe where you're in a department or a group where you're not necessarily satisfied for whatever reason, and you don't think that's going to improve, then really, and if you like the organization, there's opportunities in the organ, especially in this one. I mean, I see it all the time. People going into different jobs, getting different skill sets. So, you might get to the point where you're realizing that, the situation's not going to improve, and it doesn't help your manager, it doesn't help the employer, and it doesn't help you if you stay in that situation, in that sort of, with that kind of experience.
So coming from the enthusiastic guy, there's a level of you got to give your manager a chance. You got to stand up for yourself. Don't immediately go around and go to HR, but also self-evaluate in what situation would you find yourself where maybe you would be more enthusiastic. And if that's within reach, go get it. If it's not,
Yep.
maybe reevaluate where you are.
Yes.
I love it. I think that's fantastic. I feel like we could talk for hours on this. Like you said, we are on the committee.
Yep.
I myself am very much interested in engagement and all the different ways that we can make that happen. I think it's been absolutely fascinating to hear your thoughts and your background on these. You said a couple of things that were just worded in a way that I would have never thought of. So I really want to thank you for that, and thanks for coming on and being here. Um, any any sort of last thoughts or last words of advice, or Greg, shut up, we're done here, that you want to kind of leave us with?
Yeah, no, I want to say one thing that I didn't say earlier, and I think, I'm not sure. I can't tell you if I'm successful or not, but I like to think I'm pretty good at what I do. But I think one of the best things a leader can do is give the why. I know it sounds like a cliche, but if I'm working with a manager and say they want to pay an employee X and we can't, right? Our internal equity, or we just can't based on the role. Well, as opposed to telling the manager, no, we can't do that. I would tell the manager why we can't get to that rate, whether it be the market conditions, whether it be internal equity. So that's helped me build relationships here. You always want to give people the why. My employees the same way. I might be asking them to do things they don't want to do, but if I tell them why it needs to be done and the importance, it's a lot easier. So that's kind of one thing I wanted to touch on. But no,
No, I
overall,
like it. It goes back to that comment earlier about if people understand how they fit in,
yeah,
they will be a more positive, more engaged
yeah,
team member. And kind of the same thing here. If the manager understands why they can't offer something, they will have an easier time representing that.
yes. And like I said, I think it sounds like cliche, but it is one of the most important things you can do to be an effective leader.
I suppose most cliches are cliches because there's some truth to them.
Yeah. Yes. So no, this has actually been, I was nervous coming into this. It's been a great experience.
What are you
Yeah,
passionate about outside of work that's going to get you that golden trophy?
so I have 9 million hobbies because I'm not good at sitting idle.
9 million.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to ask our producers if we have time for that. Can
Well,
you pick one or two?
one of my, one of the passions I have is cooking. I started cooking on Sundays to sort of a stress relief. I had a very stressful job, fast-paced environment, so someone had made the recommendation that, find something you like to do that makes you relax. So, and cooking's that thing. So, I find it to help with me being creative, right? Um, you can kind of get creative with cooking. It's a big pleaser. I live in a neighborhood where we're all close with our neighbors, so like tonight and tomorrow, we all bring a certain food and we all eat together. So I love getting the reaction if mine's good, but my friends will also tell me if it's terrible too. So I love being able to do that, make people happy through food, and it's a stress relief. My daughters are now interested, so we cook together. So I find, in terms of my salsa and chili recipes, I think I can go into business with that. But
You sound, what's the word? Enthusiastic
yeah,
about this. So you carry your
yeah,
enthusiasm forward in your personal life and not just in your work
yeah.
life as well.
But yeah, I have a million hobbies. I like the woodwork. I like the golf. I love the Patriots. So
Woodworking.
yeah,
Talk to me about that. And I'm curious about that one because that's I'm also personally kind of interested in understanding woodworking better myself. But I'm thinking of that as you're really molding a finished product. And is it really ever finished? Do you ever keep sort of tinkering with it, which is very similar to the way that you might approach a role, where you're continuously trying to mold your role into something better. And are you ever really done self-improving, personally or at work?
yeah. Actually, I'll tell you, I'm a horrible woodworker. Yeah.
That's just the starting point, right?
If I was, if I performed at the same level of my job that I do as a woodworker, I'd be fired. So, but yeah, it's no, I don't think it's ever done. Well, especially not for me, because I usually I buy extra wood because I usually have to do things 2 and 3 times. I would say on a larger scale, I'm very much similar outside of work than I am inside of work.
Your passion and your
Yeah,
enthusiasm carry over. Just the
and my
tasks are different. What you're embodying is not filling out forms and just signing up for a benefit.
yeah,
It's all these other elements that contribute to the whole.
yes, yeah.
So those relationships that you mentioned, I mean, that's key to fulfilling that new world HR that we have.
Thank you, and guys, have a great weekend. This is a really nice experience.
For more information on today's subject, visit leaderbank.com. In addition to past episodes, you can also find our corresponding blog entries for more insights. This podcast is a production of LeaderBank NA, Equal Housing Lender, member FDIC, NMLS number 449250.